going to start by sewing step 2, which is using the exterior body piece number 1. We're going to sew them together along the bottom here using our 1/2 inch seam allowance, sewing them with right sides together. You're going to take that seam over to the iron and you're going to press that open. Our next step has us working with the exterior pocket, piece number 5, and it tells you to turn down and press 1/2 inch and then turn again to hide that raw edge. Then it asks you to top stitch. When you top stitch, you want to stitch close to this fold here. If I stitch up here, then there's going to be a whole lot of room for this flap to come up, and that's not good. So we just want to stitch close to this fold. And then your piece should look like this. Step tells us to place this exterior pocket onto our piece that we had just sewn. If you followed these marking guides, then you should have at least traced this solid line onto your exterior fabric. And it's a little bit hard to see my chalk, but I do have it there. And I'm going to just lay this on top and pin it in place. And I'm going to pin away from where I'm going to be sewing my straps on, because all I want to do is secure this in place. So I'm going to put my pins at the top of my pocket and at the bottom of my pocket, not on the sides. Just like that. So what we're doing next is we're actually pinning our straps to both sides of the bag. So I already have this one pinned just to show you. I had laid it right on top of the markings from the pocket on the non-pocket side. We still want to have this marked. And I have it all the way down to where the end of my line is for my marking, because this is going to be sewn over, so don't worry about raw edges. Okay, so I have it pinned to there. Some things I want you to note would be to have it straight, also to not have it twisted, so you want to make sure that this outer piece smoothly goes around and is on the outside here as well. And then marking your X's. I marked mine about 1 inch away from the raw edge. The pattern had it a little bit farther down, and from my experience I don't like that big gap of flappy action at the top, so I marked my X's a little bit higher. So I'm going to show you how to do that here on this side. I'm going to line up the bottom of my strap with the bottom of my pocket, and I'm going to lay it right on top of that raw edge, which is going to hide it. And I'm going to pin across, okay, which is why we didn't need to pin the sides of our pocket. So I'm going to just pin across again. Okay. And then I will mark an X for myself to know where to stop 1 inch from the top. Okay. And then I'm going to follow my strap around so that the outside remains the outside, and I'm going to pin it the same exact way over here, lining up the bottom, pinning across, and then marking the top in the same place, 1 inch away, same place on both sides. Here I have a top stitched piece of our strap, and I'm going to show you how I did this in just a moment, but I just want to point out what it should look like in the end. So I started at the top of one side, went down, across, and up, and then I went over, diagonal, over, and up to make like a figure 8 at the top. Okay, so I'll show you how to do that to get like a nice neat X at the top here. So placing my piece underneath, seeing where I want the top of my X to be is where I'm going to start my top stitching. Top stitching is always close to the edge, So I'm going to start here, making sure that I backstitch the beginning. Alright, getting close to the top where I have my X marked. Okay, needle down, pivot. I'm going to go across first. Okay, till my needle meets my thread again. I'm going to lift my presser foot up and I'm going to go on a diagonal now, following my X marking down. Pivot going back across. Down. Pivot so that I can go up on my other diagonal marking. Okay. Now I like to just backstitch going across just a little bit. Okay. All right. And then you should have something that looks like this. I'm going to show you that again real quick from this angle. To take your bottom contrasting piece, piece number 7, and you're going to pin it across the seam line on the bottom of your bag, lining up the notches and the dots. And you can see now how this is going to cover up the raw edge of the bottom of the pocket and my straps on both sides. So it instructs you to top stitch, and remember, top stitching is very close to the edge. So you want to stitch right along this fold, not so close that you run over it, but just right along the top here. And then you're going to baste, meaning long temporary stitches along the sides at 3/8. So we're going to take to the machine and do that. Things to pause and point out is that I am trimming my threads as I go, and then if I basted correctly at 3/8, then whenever I sew at 1/2 inch, my seam is going to go on the outside of this basting and you'll never know it was there. We're going to construct the sides, so we want piece number 2, both of piece number 2, and then both of this contrasting piece. It's going to actually go onto the bottom. You're going to line up the notches and the dots that you can see on the pattern that you should have marked onto your fabric, and you're going to pin it so that you have the wrong side of your contrasting fabric on the right side of this exterior fabric, and you want to pin it into place. And then you are going to top stitch along here, and then you're going to baste these together. I just did this small section within 3/8, of course, again. So basting close to the edge, top stitching close to your 1/2 inch fold, and you're going to do that to both pieces. Before we move on to the next bit, I want to mention that whenever you are stitching and basting, don't forget to change your stitch length. This is a standard stitch length. This is the widest setting on your machine. Okay, so now the next step is for us to attach these sides to the exterior body. So what you're going to do is you're going to match up your notches together here. You should have a notch on both pieces, and I'm going to lay right sides together here, and then I'm going to pin, and you should be able to see some small dots, excuse me, on each side of this side panel piece, because that's what you're going to be stitching in between. So make sure that your machine is back onto your standard stitch length, and then you're going to be stitching, I'm just going to put in 2 pins here. You're going to be stitching between these 2 dots, back stitching at the beginning and the end. And you're going to do that on both sides. What you want to do next is you want to take your shears and you want to clip just below the small circle up to, but not through the circle and not through your stitching. This is going to help us in our next step. Once you do that to all 4 places, we can take our piece here and we can pivot it much easier, and we're going to line up both tops of our exterior contrasting fabric, and we're going to pin that into place. If you ever encounter anything difficult, like when sewing over on some excess fabric, or you might have encountered that here with the straps, just gently tug it through. Don't yank it, but just kind of help that through the machine, because often like a varying thickness might be difficult for the machine to navigate. So line up your raw edges, line up your top, make sure that everything matches and meets, and then you're going to sew starting at the bottom, okay, and you're going to sew from this circle all the way to the top using our 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to do that with all 4 sides. So when you are done, your stitching should go in a rectangular fashion, and your stitching should meet up with the circles at the bottom here. So make sure that you're back stitching at both the top raw edge and then down here where your dots are. And you want to do this to both sides. You will notice that our bag is starting to take shape. So now the next step is to turn this right side out. And because we clipped already, the corners should poke out nicely. You're just going to want to help them out just a little bit of a poke, and they should be nice and sharp looking. As long as you didn't leave any openings, you stitched to your dot and connected all of your edges, and sewed it the way you're supposed to. So your bag should look like this and be ready for the next step. Our next couple steps are going to involve the patch pocket and then the interior body. So the zipper rectangle is going to go on one side of the interior body, and then the patch pocket is going to go on the other side, which I have marked. So I'm going to set piece number 6 aside, but that's going to be coming back in front of us very shortly, and we're going to take patch pocket number 3, and we're instructed to fold it in half like a square. I took it to my iron so that it was pressed nice and clean on this fold, and all of my edges matched up. And then we are asked to sew around the edges, the open edges, not the fold, here, okay, except leaving a 3-inch opening so that we could turn it right side out. So we're going to do that right now, and this is going to be a standard stitch length. Okay, so starting at one end, 1/2 inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning. Okay, I like to give a little back stitch just to secure. You can lift it up and you can move ahead 3 inches. Put your needle back down, back stitch, and finish up the side. Now what we want to do is, of course, clip our threads, okay? And we're going to clip these threads in between so that we can turn our piece right side out. And of course we know that when we do that, we want to clip our corners. Okay, so we're going to trim not through the stitching but on the diagonal. Okay, and we're going to do it down here as well. Now we should be able to turn this right side out, poking out our corners with something that is not sharp. We don't want to create any holes. Okay, you can use a blunt-ish object. I would say be careful using a pencil. Something like a chopstick would work great if you have one of those. Okay. And we want all 4 corners poked out really nicely. And then I want you to take this over to your iron and press it. I'm going to take our patch pocket and we're going to place it so that the opening here is along the bottom of where we have marked for our patch pocket to sit. Make sure that it is square with the top, and you can pin it into place. And what you're going to want to do is to top stitch, so that means close to the edge, top stitch around these 3 sides. And you can, if you wish to, sew some lines down parts of the pocket so that you could end up with what would look like a little pencil or pen holder if you want to, or you can just leave it entirely open. I'm just going to leave it entirely open and show you how you should stitch this. So knowing how our pieces move through the machine, we should start on the top right corner and make our way around in our U shape. And you should have a pocket trim close to the end here. You should have a pocket that looks like this. Okay. Next, we're going to be sewing our zipper pockets to the interior piece of our fabric. So we want to have the zipper rectangle marked on both pieces, and you can, here we go, lightly see where I have this one marked. Okay, and I'm going to want to line up my pieces so I can, if I want to, use a pin and make sure that it is just in place there. And I want to do that on both sides so that it lines up. Put my pin through the top piece, and then I can see where this rectangle is on the bottom piece. And so now I should have these lined up. Okay, it's hard to tell, but I can see where my line is on my back fabric here. All right, so I'm going to leave those in place, and then I'm going to be sewing right on top of that rectangle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin around it. Now I want to stitch right on top of this line, and I'm going to make sure that I overlap just slightly where I begin and end. So that means that I can start up top here or wherever I choose to start. And I don't have to back stitch because I'm going to back stitch over top of it. I'm going to overlap. So standard stitch length right on my marking. Here we go. Over top, back, forth, and done. Our next step is to cut through the center of our zipper. Oh, well, what's going to be the opening for our zipper. So what I like to do is I like to fold this and take my shears. I want to make sure that my stitching is lined up on each side, and then I'm going to carefully begin to cut through the layers, okay? And then I'm going to cut down until I almost get to the end, okay? Not the whole way. And then what I want to do is carefully cut a diagonal, but I don't want to cut through the stitching, okay? So like a little Y cut at the end, turn around and do the same thing over here. Okay, cutting down the center, a Y cut at the end. Okay, and now I'm going to push this entire pocket piece through. Okay, and I'm going to help it to lay flat on this side by pulling it through, but then what's really going to help is taking it to the iron. So go ahead and take it to the iron and press all of this flat, and then we'll come back and we'll start stitching again. I'm going to lay, here, now this will make sense. I'm going to lay this centered over top of the zipper, and I'm going to pin so that my zipper stays centered, and we're going to stitch through all layers of our zipper in just a moment. So I'm going to get this pinned and then we're going to sew. Okay, you can see that I have pinned all around my zipper, and I've pinned a lot. I really don't want this guy going anywhere. So I'm going to top stitch through all layers. That means the outside, the inside of the pocket, and then I'm going to sew through this fabric to the side of my zipper. What is ideal for this would be a zipper foot, but you can do it without a zipper foot, and I'm going to show you how to do that. A zipper foot helps you get close, but if you can't, then that is okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm going to lift my presser foot up, and I'm going to pull the zipper foot, actually, or the zipper teeth, out of the way. It'd be a two-hand job. I had to kind of like really lift my presser foot up and put the tab towards me and then kind of like push it underneath the foot. Okay, so now I've got my zipper tab out of the way so that I can sew around this end without much of a problem. Okay, now I'm going to drop my needle again, lift my presser foot. Now I have more room to pull this back and out of the way. Now we're done with our zipper. Your zipper should lay centered, be able to open and close. And the next step is our pocket. What we are doing next is we're taking this lining piece of the pocket and we're going to match up the sides and the top, and we're going to fold it in half, and you're going to sew around all 3 sides. So again, knowing which way our machine sews, I'm going to start on the left hand side, if you will, turned around, okay? And I'm going to have to pull this exterior fabric out of the way while I sew my pocket closed. Okay, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. I'm going to pull the fabric out of the way as I go. What you should have at the end here is a pocket that you can reach into from your zipper side. Again, no stitching should be showing through your exterior fabric. It should just be like this, and then whenever you turn it towards your inside here that you're going to see, no stitching is visible. Zip it open. Here's our little pocket. Zip it closed. You succeeded. Our next step is to take this interior fabric and fold it right sides together. And we're going to sew up the sides. Okay. So we're using our 1/2 inch seam allowance, making sure that your top corner is lined up, that your edges are lined up, and you're going to be sewing with your, again, your 1/2 inch seam allowance. What we're going to do next is we're going to fold open this corner. And my fabric is dark, so it's hard to see, but you want it to be even so that the seam falls down the middle, and you're going to press it open so that you have a nice triangle, the seam open, and we're going to mark 1 3/4 inch from the point. So down the center seam, 1 3/4 inch. I'm going to mark that right here. Okay, and then now that that's straight, I want to know what that looks like going across my piece. So I'm going to lay it flat, and I'm just going to mark a straight line across my piece. So I want to do this to both sides, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch right across that marking. You want to do that to both sides. What I can do is I can take the lining and I can lay it, of course, so that you can trim this corner out if you want, or you can leave it and just kind of tuck it under, and then this corner should fit very nicely inside of this corner. Right? And you can decide whether you want the zipper towards whichever side of the bag you would like. Okay? And so now this should fit down inside of the bag, and then we're going to prep it to have the bias binding sewed around the top, and then we will have a completed bag. Almost done. So what we're going to do is we're going to take number 8, which is the bias trim, which is something that bias is something used to finish a raw edge. So we're going to finish the top of our bag by binding it with this. So the instructions tell you to fold it in half first and press, and then fold one of the edges in and press again. So that is why my piece looks like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bag And I'm going to make sure, first of all, that my that the center seam here of my interior matches the clip here, and I'm going to line the interior of my bag up and make it ready for my bias binding to go around it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, like the instructions tell me, the center of the top of the bag, and I want to make sure that my raw edges are lined up, that they are secured together. And then starting here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this so that the raw edge matches up, and I'm going to go the whole way around. So go ahead and pin that, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when mine is fully pinned. Okay, mine is still in the process of pinning, but I wanted you to see what it looked like. And I also wanted to point out that as you go around, there are some seams that you will encounter, like at the sides of your bags. What would be good would be to press these open with your hands so that they lay open and not just push to one side, and then you pin them. So keep doing that the whole way around. So I have got my bias pinned the entire way around my bag with the raw edges lining up at the top. What I want to point out that I did here at the beginning on this piece underneath was I folded it. If I unfold it and we wrap this around the bag, this raw edge is going to show. It's going to look like, well, kind of like this, where you can see it. We don't want to see this. So if you tuck it over and then we roll it around, you're not going to be able to see any raw edge, and it's going to look really nice. So I will show you that at the end. Now you're going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance still, so that's going to fall right in here. So we're going to start sewing, and then we're going to fold over. You're going to want to roll the bag as you go so that you can keep stitching. So it's going to kind of go around, so help it out. The more fabric or body of your bag that you have in front of you, the easier it is to work. I have stitched the whole way around. I can then take my bias binding and go ahead and turn it up, and this fold that I initially pressed should fall right on the edge of my fabric, and I should be able to then tuck the other raw edge, and then you see how this just kind of hugs the outside of the raw edge and hides it. So what you want to do is you want to take this and pin this down the whole way around, and then we're going to sew through all layers. So go ahead and pin this, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like. Okay, we're pinned and we're ready to sew. So if you take a look here, you can see where the bias binding fold has now given us a nice finished look. No raw edges are showing. If for some reason as you're going around this your bias binding didn't fit over it, or you can still see that initial line of stitching and this doesn't cover it up, then you can always do what's called grading or trimming. You can trim this fabric under here down just a little bit if you need until this fits over. That won't hurt it at all. So make your adjustments as you need, and then we're going to top stitch, which, remember, top stitching is close to this folded edge, and you're going to sew through all layers. So take your time, making sure that the straps are out of your way and that you have your fabric in front of you as you work. It does not matter where you start on your bag. Just make sure that you not top stitch, but back stitch at the beginning and end. And I took my extension table off of here so that my fabric and the round shape of my bag could fit underneath my machine and rotate just a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And there you should have it. You should have your finished bag. You did it!